Welcome to the Course One podcast. In this podcast, we explore the emerging open financial system. We dive into scalability, interoperability, proof-of-stake, blockchains, and many other parts of this coming financial singularity. Tune in every Monday to dive deep into these cutting-edge projects and protocols with Course One team members and guests. Hi, this is Brian, and I'm here today with Kwon. Do is one of the co-founders of Terra, and Terra is probably many of you are aware of. We've been running a validator on Terra since they've launched, which was kind of last summer. Terra is a really exciting project. It's one of those blockchains that have really gotten a tremendous amount of traction, but they've been target user groups and non-crypto users, the sort of like normal people using it for payments. So I think for that reason, it's flown a little bit under the radar. So I'm really excited to dive into with Do about what Terra is, how it's progressed over the last year, and kind of what's up ahead. If people want to dive more deeply into Terra, also make sure to check out episode number 3 of this podcast, where Meher talked with Nicholas Platias, who's the head of research at Terra. One of the core parts of Terra are stablecoins, and he dived into Nicholas about, what is the mechanisms and the kind of systems that Terra uses to make sure that those stablecoins remain stable. So yeah, with that, thanks so much for joining me today, though.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So maybe just give us, many people will not be too familiar with Terra. What's the sort of 2-minute high-level vision of what you're trying to accomplish?
Sure. So Terra is what you would call sort of a vertical blockchain built using Tendermint and the Cosmos SDK. And sort of the core features of this blockchain is that it issues a set of stablecoins that are pegged to some of the world's most popular currencies. So, for example, the Korean won, the USD, the SGD, the IMF SDR, and so on and so forth. And then they're all swappable each other on chain using the current FX rates amongst the currencies. So sort of the angle that we've been approaching the Terra blockchain with is, at inception, Terra started out as sort of an alliance of 15 e-commerce companies across East and Southeast Asia that were collectively doing tens of billions of dollars in volume. And in the sort of the half year in which we've launched a payment gateway called Chai, running on top of the Terra protocol, we hit an important milestone yesterday with 1 million active purchasing users and close to $1 billion USD in transaction volume run rate. So that was a pretty important internal milestone for us.
On a single day. So that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have sort of payment assets in Korea. So one of them is Chai. So that works with leading e-commerce companies such as Timon, which is my co-founder Daniel's previous venture, doing about $3.5 to $4 billion in annual sales. And then Yanorja, which is the largest hospitality platform, CU, the largest convenience store, Privia, a flight booking website, and then so on and so forth. And then we also have a payment asset called MiniPay in Mongolia, which is a joint venture with the president's family there. And then it's linking up to some popular retail locations like Zaizan Hill, which is the largest shopping center in Ulaanbaatar. It's hooking up to the largest taxi company, and then so on and so forth. So it's variegating across a lot of different offline retail locations. So that's pretty exciting.
Cool. When you guys started, you had maybe an accomplished team, and particularly your co-founder having had a strong track record, but still, getting 15 e-commerce companies sort of sign up with a totally novel thing is quite an accomplishment. So what's the value proposition to those e-commerce companies, and what was your kind of pitch to them to convince them?
Sure. So what's really interesting in Asia is that the way that finance and payments are regulated is perhaps a lot more involved than it is in the US and Europe. And one of the reasons for this is because in Asia, they've had a lot of issues with, capital inflows and outflows out of the country. So generally how these things are regulated, there's a fewer number of incumbents, and it's a lot more tightly regulated and controlled than is the West. So as a consequence, some of the things that you see is that you have a few middlemen that actually charge pretty high fees and don't really add value. So what's hilarious is that in Korea, for instance, you have something called value add networks. And basically all of these guys do is that they play a wrapper around banking APIs and then sends the money that you could have settled anyway to the bank accounts of your customers. So basically all they do is a wire transfer on your behalf, which you could do anyway. But the reason why value-add networks exist is because basically you have all these guys that used to work at large commercial banks, and then they basically have lobbying power with commercial banks that control API access. So they take a cut of your fee while not really doing that much to begin with.
So they're more like value subtract networks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty hilarious because they're called VANs and they're literally adding zero value. It's like in the payment chain, other guys are at least doing something, but they're adding no value at all. So this has two important implications. So number one, there are various middlemen in the payment value chain that subtract to the value and add to the fees. So it accumulates a significant amount when it propagates to the end merchant, which if you run tight payment operations, or if you run a platform business working with a lot of SMBs, it builds up to something that's significant. So for example, in the case of Timon, which is one of our largest partners, they were paying about anywhere between $80 to $100 million in various processing fees for payments. So that was something that was eating deeply into their margin, considering that their margin on an average e-commerce sale was somewhere around 7%. So if they're losing above 2% of their gross margin for processing, then that just didn't make sense as part of their business. Second, which I think might be even more important, is that having a lot of players plugged into the value chain slows down settlements. And I think this is one of the greatest roadblocks to getting digital payments adopted in some of the more developing countries in Southeast Asia. So consider the following. So if you are a cab driver in Singapore, for instance, you don't have the luxury to wait 7 to 10 days for your payments to settle, because you need the money from sales that day to be able to buy fuel and food for your family in the next. This is why, like in Singapore, I would say 70 to 80% of cabs don't take anything but cash. It's because they don't really have payment options available that are digital that would allow them to meet their working capital needs in time. And this applies to any sort of platform business that works with small businesses or individuals. Like restaurant food delivery businesses. You need the revenue right away to be able to pay for ingredients and to pay staff and things like that. And it's one of the biggest problems that we solve, because if a transaction happens over Mimi Chat or Chai, your transaction gets settled in 6 seconds, which is the average block time.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and it reminds me a lot of the pitch that we used to make back in the day in like 2013 around Bitcoin and payments, right? Where you also looked at the high cost of credit card processing and say, okay, if an e-commerce company can cut those out, it actually makes a huge difference to their bottom line. But of course, Bitcoin had all of the issues around volatility and other barriers, and so it's very understandable this is now happening in a different way, with Terra. But to dive into this, so you mentioned the example of Timon, and you mentioned that they're spending between $80 and $100 million per year on traditional payment methods on processing fees. So how far is Terra able to lower those fees, and how what's the sort of the way of lowering them?
Sure. So instead of working with various middlemen or intermediate processors, we hook up to banks directly in order to facilitate fiat on-ramps, which on average costs us about 4 cents. So on top of that, we have an on-chain transaction fee on Terra, which is about 0.5%. So those costs blended, if it comes out to 0.6, 0.7%, there's a huge improvement in terms of processing cost compared to credit cards, which easily cost 2.7% and up for most merchants. So in terms of fees, I think that's a meaningful upgrade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a massive improvement. So what's the reaction been and the response from all those incumbents and middlemen that, presumably what you're doing is extremely threatening.
Yeah, so independent of blockchain, there's actually really interesting things that's happening to payments in Asia. So basically, like number one, regulators are wanting to push credit cards and credit card processors out. So what Alipay and WeChat Pay was able to show to Asian regulatory regimes is that you don't necessarily need to give Visa or MasterCard, which are US companies, a cut of your transaction processing fees. And that's something that they hate, just money flowing to companies abroad for incumbent processing rights. So basically regulators across Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, they're all applying pressure to credit card companies to either lower their margins or exit businesses. And they're giving tax breaks and other benefits to fintech companies to grow their business. So even if it's like independent of blockchain, as a payment company, there's a lot of room for growth and potential for alternative payment gateways besides just credit cards. And secondly, like dimensionality of what alternative payment gateways are able to do is vastly increasing. So first of all, we are now able to offer installment payments or loans to our users at checkout. So which previously you needed either a banking license or a credit union license to be able to facilitate. But with the standard PG license, which the hurdles to which are relatively lower, we can now offer like microloans, for instance. So anywhere between like $500 to like $3,000 so that users can buy things that are a higher order value, like on the fly. So which means that we can cut into the exclusive domain of what credit cards were able to do before. So it's the tides are essentially helping us, chip away at traditional payment companies, and I think it's an interesting intersection of, being in the blockchain space while at the same time being in a time where regulators are willing to reform and traditional players are losing power.
Okay, cool. And we've talked about this from the perspective of the e-commerce company, but what does it look like from the perspective of somebody using Terra to make a payment? Like, for example, Chai, like who are Chai users? How do they onboard? What does it feel like? Are they aware that there's like a blockchain behind it? And can you like talk a little bit through that?
So the vast majority of Chai users are not aware that it's leveraging the blockchain. So the company does a lot of external PR as a blockchain company, but to the end user, they just mainly get exposed to the wallet through the merchant checkout pages. So they're generally not aware. So in terms of describing our user base, I think there's a fairly normal distribution from starting from age 20 all the way to, let's say, 45 and tapering off to the early 50s. And it skews meaningfully female. And a lot of the purchases that are made on the platform have strong recurring characteristics. So for example, in general purpose e-commerce, general household goods such as toilet paper, diapers, coffee, water, those are the SKUs that are really popular at Chai, with in the fashion luxury categories, sort of lower order value items that have recurring characteristics like belts, socks, shoes are highly favored. Flights, lower order values, so like closer flights to Japan or Southeast Asia, for instance, those are also favored as well. But we're diversifying really quickly. So in terms of spotting out the unique properties of our user base, that's sort of being spread out very, very quickly.
Okay, and so you said that often the kind of encounter that the user will have with the Chai wallet is in, let's say, the merchant checkout page, right? So they're on the e-commerce side, they put something in the basket, they say, okay, I want to go and pay. And then it shows up, okay, like you can pay using Chai. So first of all, are users incentivized to use like that option versus other option, or is that the only option they have for making a payment? And how do they then link their bank account, to the kind of Terra network?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So let me get to the linking the bank account and the Terra blockchain interplay first, and then I can talk to how it sort of connects to the merchant. So first of all, when the user signs up to the Chai app, they do a quick KYC AML through SMS verification, and then they link their bank account. So we send 1 Korean won, which is a fraction of a cent, to the user's bank account with a special code embedded into it. So when the user inserts that code into the Chai app, then we are essentially being given programmatic access to withdraw funds from the user's bank account. So whenever the user wants to top up to their Terra balance on Chai, or they want to pay for a specific good beyond that balance, then we make a withdrawal from the user's bank account and then use that to buy Terra on the user's behalf, and then use that to top up the balance on the Chai app. So basically, you can think about the bank integration as sort of a convenience function for users to gain access to Terra more easily. Right now, we're working with a couple of wallets that are not banks, so they would have first citizenship rights similar to the banks, so that users would be able to top up Terra to the Chai wallet by using third-party apps as well.
Okay, and so I'm a user. I have my bank account, and I have Korean won in the bank account, to Terra, and I'm making a purchase, worth whatever $100 worth of KRW, so the Korean won. What then happens is that you're basically taking out the $100 worth of KRW, and you are purchasing with that the stablecoin, the Korean won stablecoin on Terra. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then that transaction, that sale of, like, basically we're taking, sort of the real money and giving the stablecoin, or like, maybe that's not the right way of phrasing it, but like that is done basically by kind of a payment processing company that you run, or like who makes that conversion?
Yeah, so Chai makes that conversion. And currently in Korea, it has e-money and PG licenses. So you can think about Terra, which is, in regulators' perspective, a e-money or a point or gift card for the Chai payment gateway. So it has legal standing as something that is redeemable across various e-commerce companies.
Okay, cool. And so then the user has basically this 100 KRW, and that's or the 100 KRW gets directly sent, or the 100 Terra KRW get directly sent to the merchant. And when that transaction happens, there's also a 0.5% fee that's charged.
Yes.
It goes towards the stakers, right, or the holders of Luna, which is the staking token of Terra.
That is correct.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's very helpful. And yeah, to the previous question. So as a user, does it show kind of, let's say Timon, do they show Chai as kind of the primary payment option, or do they give maybe some sort of discount if they pay with in this way as opposed to using a credit card? Or
yeah, so we are prominently listed as the main or the default payment option in most of the merchants that we work with. So Timon and Yanorja, for instance, which are our number 1 and number 2 volume drivers respectively, list us as the number 1 payment gateway. And then there are banners in various places in the real estate of the app, of their apps, so that users would be directed towards shopping with Chai versus other payment options. And they do this because it is in their incentive to lower fees, to pay the amount of processing fees by increasing the market share that Chai has within their checkout process. In addition to that, we have the base layer of how Chai works is that users are expected to top up a balance into Chai, a Terra balance into Chai, instead of doing a bank withdrawal for every single transaction. So for example, the base use case for Chai is that every time that the user's balance falls below $20, instead of topping up the precise amount of the transaction, so let's say that the user is trying to do a $38 transaction when there's only a $20 balance left, instead of topping up only $38, it would top up $100. So in some sense, in the user wallet, there's always a residual balance of Terra that is left. And in the Terra system, we call that seniorage, because basically every time that we sign up a user and activate them, it helps them to hold a certain amount of Terra in their wallets. So as we grow in terms of usership and transaction volume, that increases the total value locked in the Chai system of Terra. So essentially, in the perspective of the Terra economy, it gives us working capital to be able to finance some promotions and discounts in order to further facilitate adoption.
Yeah. I guess from a user perspective, doesn't that look weird though? Because I'm making like a $38 purchase and it's $100 that go out of my bank account.
It's fairly common amongst most alternative payment gateways in the region. So we do it, KakaoPay does it. I think it's characteristic of most Alipay-esque payment gateways that are here.
Okay, cool. So you guys have had tremendous traction since you launched. So can you talk us a little bit through what are some of the metrics that you're seeing in the network, and what are the most important milestones that you've achieved so far?
Sure. So obviously the two main metrics that we've been monitoring is the number of users that we've activated and the transaction value run rate. So we now have passed into the million mark. And then in Korea, we want to get to 10 million within a reasonably short time frame. So in a country about 45 million users, that would allow us to gain penetration into about 20% of the population. So that's sort of our next meaningful milestone. And then I think the immediate implication of that is that it would allow us to grow transaction volume in Korea from 1 billion to 10, which is somewhat of a linear relationship. So how we want to get there is by launching something called a Chai card at the end of April, at the beginning of May this year. The interesting characteristic of the Chai card is that now we're signing up merchants quickly, but there is a very long tail of e-commerce companies in Korea, given that it's a $120 billion e-commerce market. So basically what launching the Chai card would allow us to do is that while we sign up all of these merchants, they would increase the accessibility of the Chai app through every single merchant in Korea instead of just the ones that we sign up. So in terms of our user acquisition process, it's going to be a much valuable proposition for users to sign up to a wallet that is accessible across, all the different merchants instead of just a few dozen or a few hundred. So once we launch the Chai card, we think that's going to be a stepwise improvement in both our usership and transaction volume. And that's one of the things that we are really looking forward to. It's going to have two benefits. So number one, given that Chai offers promotions and benefits using the seniors model, it's going to offer a different gradient of cashbacks depending on how much balance that you maintain within the Chai app. So let's say for the lowest tier, maybe 3% cashback on every transaction. For a higher tier, maybe 5%, which we think is going to be, given current market conditions and payments, is going to be super attractive to most price conscientious consumers. Second is we're going to be leveraging the swap functionality within the Terra. Yeah, sure.
Let me just interject there. So people will have this Chai card, and first of all, for a merchant that hasn't signed up with Terra, hasn't been sort of onboarded, how can they accept the Chai card, or like how can they accept payment through that?
Yeah, so every merchant already accepts debit or credit cards, so it's going to be a top-up debit card in a network that we co-developed with the BC network, which is a dominant card network here. So simply by entering their their card information into that existing debit credit card rail, they'll be able to accept the payment.
Okay. So basically the idea is that then there's more of an incentive for people to say, okay, I'm using Chai as kind of my main payment method because either I can pay directly or I can pay with this Chai card.
Sure.
And now you mentioned cashback. I mean, 3% or 5% cashback sounds like a huge amount. How are you able to give such high cashback rewards?
Oh, so once again, that's the ability to give cashback is contingent on the users consistently topping up to their balance, right? So in some sense, like we are able to offer cashback on the purchases because the user, keeps buying up Terra to free up working capital for the economy. And furthermore, generally, when we offer 3% cashback, is usually a co-promotion with the merchant. So for example, when we offer some sort of promotion scheme with like Timon, or like Starbucks, for instance, like we generally come up with a scheme where we put some of the cost and Starbucks put some of the cost. It's as sort of like a rewards program for people that want to do that. Usually the split is somewhere down the middle.
Okay, and so basically the idea is, let's say we're talking about 3% cashback, because I mean we had the actual on-chain transaction fees being 0.5%, right? So let's say 3%, you pay 1.5% if you pay half in cash back. So there's obviously like kind of 1% has to come from somewhere. And is that sort of a basically, yeah, can you just come from, are you basically selling Luna, the staking token, for say the Terra or like the Korean won Terra to pay this, or?
Yeah, so Terra is not a collateralized stablecoin, so it's algorithmically stabilized by Luna, right? So every time that we sell Terra, so i.e. the user buys Terra to maintain a chai balance in order to qualify for the cashback, it gives sort of the ecosystem revenue or firepower in working capital to be able to finance various things. So for example, if we sell 1 unit of Terra and it's fractionally reserved, then we might hold 50% in a cash reserve to make sure that the peg stays stable. And then maybe the 50% goes into a promotions buffer that we use to finance discounts and cashbacks.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And maybe another thing we can dive into, which I think very much ties into this topic. So initially, right, Terra was launched with having a fixed supply of Luna and no inflation, right? So when we launched the validator, there was basically almost no activity, right? Because unlike in Cosmos, there wasn't like block rewards and stuff like that. And then at one point, there was kind of an initiative which we were also very much involved in, where everyone said, okay, there was some basically amount of Luna of the stablecoin which was, or there's kind of like extra reserves, and then there was basically block rewards paid for this for a while, and this has recently been discontinued. So do you want to talk a little bit through what was the thinking there, and maybe also just the development of actual transaction volumes, transaction fee revenues that has allowed to discontinue Project Santa?
Sure. So I think the initial motivation of starting Santa was fairly simple. So to iterate through the audience, what Project Santa was, we were basically issuing high fee transactions on the network to subsidize block rewards for the validators. And the reason why we did that was because A, we had lots of Luna, and B, there wasn't enough block rewards to keep validators incentivized. So the math seemed to add up. But I think there was a couple of problems that we had in this assumption. It was consistently that our position that having inflation in a blockchain doesn't necessarily generate more value. So I mean, value is just inherently captured by the blockchain being used for things or people wanting to hold the tokens for ABC reasons, but it isn't generated just simply by increasing supply. So we hadn't accounted for the fact, so we naively assumed that if we give away our tokens, then that's not inflation, so it should be okay. But in terms of actual circulating supply, that actually led the tokens to inflate at a rate that we hadn't anticipated. And then that led to meaningful backlash from the community because they sort of misconstrued it as increasing the circulating supply at a time when markets were not healthy. At the same time, what we saw was that at the beginning of the network, transaction fees were negligible because transaction volumes weren't high, and then fees were maybe 0.1% of the total volume. But since then, what we've seen is we've gone from zero to close to $1 billion in transaction volume run rates. And we've increased the fees from 0.1% to 0.5% in a recent network upgrade. So combined with that, right now we're seeing daily annualized staking returns of close to 20%, which I think is quite competitive in the world of POS blockchains.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just one of the things that's really worth pausing and just acknowledging how much of an accomplishment this is. There was an article by Coinmetrics the other day where it looked at, the main blockchain networks and, kind of their traction in 2019, how many users, how inflation's developed and all those stuff. And then they also looked at transaction fees. Like, is how much in transaction fees is a network generating in aggregate. And there was really just two networks that had anything even, remotely substantial, which was Bitcoin and Ethereum. And everything else is basically, close to zero in terms of transaction fee volumes. I think Bitcoin was like the next, which was maybe it was like $1,000 a day or something like that. I think it was $1,000 for Litecoin per day, like 90,000 for ETH, and like 400,000 for Bitcoin, something like that. And of course, you're totally right, though, right? Like, I mean, if you're just inflating the main token, I mean, it works in the sense of like you're incentivizing miners, you're incentivizing validators, you're incentivizing stakers, you can secure the network, you can do a lot of things, but you're not really, there's not real value being generated, right? So I think that's just incredibly remarkable how much you guys have achieved there. So what is now at the moment the average like kind of daily transaction fee revenues?
So let's see. On any given day, depending on which day of the week, we're doing 3 mil in terms of daily. Yeah, $3 million in daily transactions. So extrapolating, half a percentage off of that, it's 150,000.
So 15,000 would that be? Yeah, of 3 million, right? 0.5%.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, I mean that's really, I mean if you put that into that kind of ranking, right, of like transaction, that's like 15 times Litecoin, and it's already 1/6 after such a short time. So yeah, no, I think this is really super exciting. Maybe a slightly different topic also around scaling. How has it been to grow the company? I mean, you guys were, I think you mentioned 14 people about a year ago. I think you had a end of year review post where I think that was discussed, and now it's grown up to 50 people or over 50 people. What have been the biggest, learnings for you and biggest challenges around that?
Yeah, so right now, just Terra proper, we're at about 55 people. So about 50 people in Seoul, a few in Singapore. And through our joint venture with Mongolia, we have about 20 people there, like working on MimiChat and MimiPay. So it's grown to be a larger organization than what it was like when we were first launching. I think, and I sort of hear this in talking to other founders as well, but one of the things that's really difficult is to scale the original vision and scale the culture. Because a lot of the people that joined later, they weren't there in the beginning when you were spending a lot of time talking about what you wanted to be doing. So you consistently have to talk about and be very stubborn in the way of wanting to stay true to what you wanted to do in the beginning. So and for payments is extremely easy because it's relatively more boring. Right, so you don't want to end up in a situation where you end up with hundreds of compliance officers and people pushing out QR codes and things like that, and then you have to stay true to why is Chai using the Terra blockchain? Why exactly is it do we want to create integrate with like a bunch of crypto wallets when it doesn't seem likely it's going to do lots of volume from day one, but those are some of the challenges that we had to face while we were growing the org.
Oh yeah, okay, I can see that. And yeah, maybe just briefly on that Mongolia front. So in Mongolia, you're basically doing something very similar to Korea in that you're setting up, payments there. And is there a similar app? Is Chai also used in Mongolia, or is there some kind of analogous thing there?
Yeah, so in Mongolia, we took a slightly different approach. So Mongolia they don't have a mature traditional financial infrastructure. So not a lot of people have access to credit or debit cards. In some capacity, cash is even not used very much. And in a lot of different cases, people still hold a lot of their net worth in livestock. So horses and sheep are quite common. So there was not as strong of an advantage to linking up with banks or existing payment methods for on-ramps and off-ramps. So basically what we did is that we launched a national messenger called MimiChat, with the expectation that we would gather a lot of the nation's populace around a popular chatting service. And we would allow direct Terra pop-ups. So Mimi Chat itself kind of looks like a normal crypto wallet that enables Terra transactions, but it just happens to have chatting functionality. So people can directly send Terra to Mimi Chat using a Terra on-chain transaction, and they can visit offline stores and just buy things with it. So it doesn't even have a backend service. It runs directly over connecting to some set of Terra nodes in the network.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, talk to us. Where do you see Terra evolving in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years? Like, I mean, we talked a little bit about some of your immediate growth goals with Chai Card and things like that. But if we take a longer perspective, what will this network and this ecosystem look like down the line?
Sure. So when we first started Terra, the reason for doing it was that we saw that there were so this was in late 2017, early 2018. Like I genuinely thought that a lot of the apps that were being built on Ethereum were super cool and interesting, but it was like as if like there was this massive deserts, and then people were building cool villages that nobody could get to. It's because like even if the applications are boring, if there isn't infrastructure for the end user to get access to them, then it's just not going to get used. So for example, if you're going to build a blockchain game, even if like the game itself is super interesting, it's much better for the users. It doesn't really provide that much utility to users if the rewards that the game is providing has to be sold on a crypto exchange, for instance, or if you're trying to build, let's say, a remittance platform, if the only utility that you can get from the end coin is selling it on an exchange, once again, it's not that interesting. So basically what we thought is that in this sort of the new world that's being created, somebody needs to spend the effort to build the roads and the infrastructure to be able to connect all of these villages together. So, and we thought payments was the best way to do that because once you have a infrastructure where sort of the base currency can be widely used and accepted by every merchant, by every store, then you can leverage that user base to build really cool and interesting things. So then blockchain games would be interesting because like you can literally earn money that you can use to buy things and interact with the real world without having to go through a highly KYC AML annoying exchange infrastructure. So that's one of the things that we wanted to do. Once we build this user base, once Terra and Chai and some of the other applications that we're currently building hits 5 million users, 10 million users, 50 million users, then it'll be interesting for people to build an ecosystem of different applications whereby you can interact with these different currencies to do really interesting things and succeed in what they do.
Yeah, so you also see something evolving and more a little bit like maybe what we have in Ethereum with these DeFi applications and stuff like that, but directly built on the Terra blockchain.
Yeah, so we are sort of leading the effort to build things in direct fintech applications. So in addition to Chai, we're standing up a project called Orange, which is a money transfer service that is geared towards travelers. So, not to get into this like a whole lot, but we noticed that because of the physical cost of having to deliver illiquid currencies, the FX rates, if you wanted to change the Korean won to the Vietnamese dong at an airport, FX costs go up to 12%, which is absolutely insane. And this happens because these currencies are relatively liquid, they're volatile against the dollar, so the cost of doing business here is really expensive. But we can definitely improve upon systems like that by having users buy Terra W, swap it on chain to Terra BNB, and they eliminate the cost of having to physically secure and deliver money and face FX volatility. So anyways, to go back to what I was saying before, we want to build sort of base financial infrastructure pieces like that. And then we want to work with, other developers and people in the community to come up with applications that our creative process hasn't really caught up to imagining.
Yeah. Maybe final question. What are your thoughts on Libra? I mean, it seems like maybe with this pushback about, them launching this, Libra currency that we'll see. I guess many expect that we'll see is going to look more like having stable coins for, different tokens, right? Maybe USD, Libra, Euro Libra, stuff like that. Presumably payments and things like that is also something that's going to be quite relevant there. Do you view Libra as a potential competitor, and what are your thoughts on that project?
Well, I don't really think it's possible to be in competition unless things are in market. And I think like having somebody like Libra enter the payment space is going to be a huge validation for blockchain in general. So I know a lot of people in crypto have reservations about Libra and whether the motivations are pure or whether it's going to get executed in the right way. But there's no denying that for people that outside of crypto, Libra successfully launching something in peer-to-peer transfers or payments is going to be a huge validation from the perspective of the institutions and governments that are currently sitting out of the crypto game. I hope they do well. I think the world is huge. I think we have a role to play in the areas in which we're working on. I think Libra is going to play a huge role in the areas in which they're playing on, and I hope there's more open platforms and open protocols in the future.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, though. If people want to learn more, get involved, what are you guys looking for? Like, what kind of, partnerships, help, questions, support?
Yeah, so we actually have a sort of a short list of different things that we want to build. And so things like Orange that I mentioned before, we're building these out in conjunction with entrepreneurial partners. So we always want to get in touch with people that are interested in building applications. It's not necessarily a smart contract play, so the implications are going to be a little bit different for people that are interested in building out real businesses that deliver value to a meaningful number of people. Well, we're always interested to fund with grants and investments and things like that. So.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Joe, for joining us. It was a big pleasure talking to you. I'm super excited about what's ahead for Terra.
Yeah, absolutely. The pleasure was all mine.
And thanks so much for tuning in. Of course, if you're excited about Terra and you get some Luna to stake, then make sure to check out Course One. We're running a validator there, and we're very excited about working with Terra in the future. So thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Chorus One podcast. Visit chorus.one for more information about our work. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to stay tuned on new episodes airing every Monday.